What's up, guys? Welcome back to another daily Bible reading snapshot. Today we are beginning to talk about one of the most difficult books in the Bible to interpret, the book of Song of Solomon. Now, we call it the Song of Solomon because in the first verse it says the Song of Songs, which is Solomon. So maybe your Bible calls it the Song of Songs, and that's because that's the first line, but it says it belongs to Solomon. So we think that Solomon probably wrote this. Now, the reason I said that this is hard to understand and hard to interpret is anytime we approach a book, we need to have some idea of what it is before we start reading it, because if we don't understand it, we will interpret it incorrectly, and then the application we take away from it will be incorrect. So various different people have looked at this book and taken it in different directions. What is it about? Well, basically, this book is a love poem that is about two people who love each other, who get married and enjoy romantic love. That's basically the bottom line of what Song of Solomon is about, but there's so much to it. Now, the reason why a lot of people look at this book and might question whether or not Solomon wrote it is because he's the guy that we remember from the book of Kings that multiplied wives. And it's like, how could he love one lady like this? Well, there's a couple answers to that. And maybe this is his first wife, and maybe Solomon wrote it about another person. Maybe this is an idealized version of love that he's writing about. So that's why I said there's a lot of different interpretations. Also, before we get into it, you should know that throughout a lot of church history, many people looked at this book and took it as a pure allegory. And an allegory is basically saying this is not really about love. This is not really about marriage love. The marriage love is symbolic of the love that God has between himself and Israel in the Old Testament, then between God and the church, and Jesus Christ specifically and the church in the New Testament. Now, I don't think that's the right way to look at this book. We think this book is really talking about two people who do get married, whether it's Solomon or somebody else getting married. It doesn't say for sure. It seems like it is Solomon. So the interpretation I'm going to take to this, and that I'm going to explain throughout the rest of this book, is that there's two main characters here. There's Solomon, who's the groom, and then there's this lady who he gets married to, the bride. So the bride and the groom, we can call them. In your ESV Bible, if you have an ESV Bible, it's helpful if you just follow the headings. I think that's the best way to look at it. You say there's she above a section and then he above a section, and that will help you understand who's talking. So I think that's super helpful. Also, there's so much symbolism baked into this because it's poetry. One of the things you should be on the lookout for is the idea of a garden or a vineyard, which is talking about, at first, a literal garden or a vineyard, and then it's used symbolically throughout this book to talk about the love that they have between each other, this husband and this wife. So as you check it out, the first chapter really is all about them introducing their love to each other. It talks about the girl and the guy. They keep going back and forth and saying how much they love each other, and there's a repeated chorus that comes up first in chapter 2 verse 7, and I think it's the end of this section, and then we see at the end of chapter 3 verse 5. And here's what it says. I'll repeat it for you because you're going to see it a couple times, and it's super important. It says, "I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the does of the field, that you do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases," which is so important as we interpret this book. One of the things that this is it's like they're talking to each other, the guy and the girl are talking to each other, and then sometimes they talk out to the audience. And this is one of the things that the audience should take away as we look at this. We're going to obviously learn from what they say, but this is specifically learning from a direct command they give to the people around them. And it's this: don't stir up love until it pleases, till it's time. And the idea there is this romantic love that's being described in Song of Solomon is so strong that if you try to stir up romantic love before its proper time, it's so dangerous. We see that at the end of the book. In chapter 8, they say, look, it's so strong that even many waters can't quench love. So just know this, that if love is stirred up, it's a very hard thing to have it be put down. So the idea is for people who are not in this situation yet, who are not married yet, don't fall in love, so to speak. Don't stir up love with another person until it's time for that love to be expressed in marriage. And that's really what this leads to. So as you read, you're going to see a lot of poetic descriptions of different things. One of the things that we see in chapter 2 is the bride talks about how amazing her future husband is, talks about how amazing he is and how much she loves him. But in chapter 3, there's a twist. It says, "On my bed by night I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him but found him not." Now, on her bed at night, think about what this is. This is a dream, okay? And this is where another interpretive, there's kind of interpretive split on this. a lot of people take this dream as going through chapter 3, 4, 5, 6. And then all the stuff that happens between chapters 3, 4, 5, 6 is a part of the dream. Right? I don't think that's the best way to look at it. I think the dream is just being described in the first 5 verses here, because it ends with that refrain, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles, the does of the field, that you do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. So I feel like that's kind of an ending point to that little section. And then Song of Solomon 3:6 starts a new section, and we have that. If you're reading an ESV Bible, you probably see that in the heading above. It says, Solomon arrived for the wedding, and that's what's being described here. So I think in chapter 3, what we get the last part of is the wedding. So from chapter 4 on, these people are married, and that's why the descriptions that you get are of romantic love between married people, because they just got married basically at the end of chapter 3, beginning of chapter 4. So I know that's a lot, and it's like, whoa, there's a lot of interpretations there, but this book is important because the main thing it should teach us is that romantic love is a good thing. And the world has taken romantic love and distorted it and does what they do outside of God's rules. So as you read this book, you're going to see a lot of descriptions of romantic love. You're going to see descriptions how it's likened to all these different kinds of flowers and spices and all these things that were common in the ancient world. And that was basically taking something that they knew and trying to describe it in transcendent language, right? And God gives us this transcendent language that love is an amazing thing. The problem is if we go outside of what God has commanded and we try to express romantic love in a way that he has not prescribed, that's when we get in danger. And this book even talks about that multiple times. So what is the context of this romantic love? You have 2 people, 1 man, 1 woman, who are married for life. That is the context of romantic love. And if we go outside those bounds, like our world has so often tried to do, we get into so much trouble and it's not going to turn out well. So as you read this, maybe if your view of romantic love is low because you think, well, that's just, worldly and secular and that's just what humans do. It's not like we're going to be doing that in heaven. Well, just remember, this was a pre-fall reality. This marriage that's being described, that's why a lot of people look at Song of Solomon and say, it's like a commentary, it's like a description of what happens in Genesis 2, at the first wedding between Adam and Eve. We see the love that they had for each other and the connection they had. That can still happen today when people get married. That's why Christians should always be excited about 2 people coming together, a man and a woman coming together in marriage in the Christian community. That should get us all really excited because we should say, look at that. It's a reflection of what we see the beauty of in Song of Solomon. It's also a reflection of the beauty that took place in the Garden of Eden. I think it's not an ironic, or it is an ironic thing. It's not an accident that this book starts in the garden. It starts in the garden. It goes to the garden in chapter 5, and it comes back to the garden at the end. Because I think there's something that should remind us of the beginning of how God made us to be man and woman in marriage and enjoying that for life. So that's a lot on Song of Solomon. And as you read, we're going to get more into that later on. But now we're looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 12 in the New Testament. Paul talks about the thorn in his flesh. Now, he's describing a scene where he had been taken up to see things in heaven. Then he says, whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know. But I saw things that I'm not even allowed to tell you guys about. Jesus revealed things to Paul that Jesus told Paul, I'm revealing this to you, but that's not even something that I want you to tell other people about. So he says that. And then he says, but to keep me from being conceited or proud, Jesus gave him a thorn in the flesh. Now, what is that? There's debate on that, whether he had, a bad hip or whether he had bad eyesight. I think that might be the case because in one of his books he says, I know that you Christians would have gouged out your eye for me. So that's why a lot of people look at this and say he must have had some type of eye problem, which obviously caused him pain. And he asked Jesus multiple times, please take it away from me. But he said to Paul, he says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Then Paul says, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Now, remember the context of all this. You have these apostles, so to speak, saying to the Corinthians, hey, Paul, you shouldn't listen to him. He's weak. He's frail. Look how he's being persecuted. The people of God shouldn't be persecuted like that. The people of God shouldn't be weak like that. God wouldn't let his servant, Paul says he's a servant, wouldn't let Paul be so, have eye problems and have all these problems if he was really a servant of God. And they started to believe that, and Paul's combating that false idea by saying all these things, saying, look, no. Jesus said his power is made perfect in Paul's weakness. What does that mean? If Paul was the biggest, strongest, the tallest, the most impressive, all those things, a lot of people would look at that and say, well, Paul's starting a movement based on Paul's charisma, his charm, his abilities. But this says, no, it was clear that the messenger was weak. And the reason God did it that way was to prove that the power was all about God. God was the one saving people's souls. It wasn't Paul. So he reminds them that. And then he goes on at the end of this chapter. That's just the first part of the chapter. The second part of the chapter, he defends himself and he says, look, the reason I'm so adamant about telling you these things is because I care about your souls. And you're being persuaded to believe things that aren't true, things that will end up damaging you in the end. So don't be persuaded to follow these other people. Don't be persuaded to follow these other gospels. And then he says, we defended ourselves for your good. That's why we're being so defensive. That's why chapter 10, 11, 12, and 13, there's a lot of, Paul explaining things about himself or defending his apostleship. He says, it's for your good because I want you guys to be walking in the truth. So that's a lot we're looking at today, but hopefully as you read Song of Solomon and 2 Corinthians, that you continue to grow in your knowledge of God and you'll continue to see God's goodness, even in the things that he's made. So thanks for reading with us. We'll see you back tomorrow for another Daily Bible Reading Snapshot.